but this is a rock band. That is a very bold move.
Well, it might have seemed bold, you know, from the outside, but, you know, we were growing up at a time when everybody was looking for something different. You know, people didn't want to just fit the mold, and there are those of us who, you know, tried something outside the what was in danger of becoming a tradition, and largely has over the years. But, you know, I don't think people looked at it back then and said, oh, wow, that's weird. I mean, some people did, but generally speaking, back then, the idea of bringing other instruments into pop and rock music was pretty common, you know. I mean, it really was very common that people tried everything out. You know, there have always been, at one time or another, a few folks who brought instruments, unlikely instruments, into pop and rock music. Violin is a frequent visitor to the world of pop and rock and crossover music, especially since sort of so-called crossover classical has been a flavor for 15, 20 years now, I suppose. Certainly, by the time Vanessa Mae came along in '94, it's 13 years ago. I mean, you know, she was the new face of sexually charged, sort of potentially rather dangerous underage kind of scary kind of stuff. I mean, I was quite disapproving about Vanessa Mae when I first met her at an inaugural kind of unleashing by EMI at a EMI annual conference where she got up to play, and I, in fact, was also playing as well. I was quite disapproving of the way they marketed her, and but you know, there'd been fiddlers before that, and starting off when I started off, I mean, there was. In America, there was Jean-Luc Ponty who played with Zappa. There was a guy who played in Kansas who played fiddle. In the UK, there was Darrell Way, who played with a band called Curved Air, who were on tour with us on a few tours. There was a guy who played fiddle in Gentle Giant, the prog rock band. Then, of course, there was the early classical crossover stuff, people you know, who were essentially classical musicians, but became a little bit in the pop side of classical music. Yeah, it's always been that sort of tendency. I mean, Oboe even made an entry into the top 10, played by a guy in Roxy Music in the song Virginia Plain. Yeah, also, people didn't kind of think, oh, that's weird, or look disapprovingly. They just thought, oh, well, they're musical instruments. It's good to see someone giving it a try. Flute's been a constant coming and going in all kinds of areas of music. It's not, I'm not the only person to be doing it. I'm just the one that's probably persevered and more internationally has been kind of seen as the guy doing that in the more sort of rock side of things. I've never had a flute lesson or any other kind of music lesson in my life. So it was just trial and error, just really picking it up and trying to figure out what it was that Mr. Boehm, the inventor of the modern concert flute, was getting at when he, after trial and error, came up with a definitive mechanism that is still essentially the one we use today in terms of flute-making technology. And it's an ergonomic minor miracle, really, but if you pick up a flute, you probably find yourself your fingers will go to those places, you know. That was I mean, I didn't have a flute fingering chart or a book, you know, to how to play the flute. I mean, I just had to figure it out. And I think I had a little go at saxophone. We had a saxophone player in a band that I played in when I was about 18 years old, and I'd had a little go on a saxophone, so I kind of knew, roughly speaking, it was a similar mechanism, so it wasn't totally alien to take up the flute. But the embouchure thing and getting a note and developing a sound, that was a little harder. And I used to reinforce, because when I played electric guitar, I used to do what was called scat singing. You know, you'd play a solo and you would sing in unison with what you were playing. And that technique goes back to the beginning of time, but popularized by jazz and blues artists in the USA. So I used to do that when I played guitar, so it was a natural extension for me to do that when I played the flute, to reinforce the note I was playing by singing the same note, or roughly, at the same time, and giving it a more aggressive and more vocal quality. And also popularized by Roland Kirk, an American jazz sax player who made an album of flute music called I Talk with the Spirits, which a friend passed on to me when he heard me playing the flute and said, "Oh, I know this, I just bought an album by this guy Roland Kirk. He plays, he does that thing that you do." And so I listened to that record and thought, wow, yeah, this guy really is a master of that type of performance. And it was a Roland Kirk piece, Serenade to a Cuckoo, that was the first piece that I played on stage with the early Jethro Tull as a flute instrumental. It was the first kind of flute tune that I learned, really.